Hey, this is Craig Custance, host of The Full 60 and one of the many NHL writers at The Athletic. Finally ready to talk about actual hockey on actual ice as part of our season preview here. Couldn't be more happy to bring in currently three of my favorite people at The Athletic, hopefully four if Jesse Granger arrives when he arrives. We've got Saad Youssef in Dallas. We've got Jesse Granger coming. We have Lisa Dillman. And, of course, we have Tarek Al-Bashir in D.C. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for doing this. How happy are you guys to finally have some hockey?
I'm not sure how much people out there know how hard it is to fill, 9 months of space with 8 hockey games being played by your team. The Capitals played 8 games since March the 9th.
That's incredible. I think when we started drafting the everything draft, and I realized we'd run out of things to do without hockey, that's when I knew we were like, okay, we need some games. We need people on the ice. And so we thankfully we have that now. And I promise, because we have hockey to talk about, I don't want to make this COVID or anything. You know, we're excited to talk hockey and have predictions. But Saad, I have to start with you, my friend, because you are in Dallas. I want to make sure I get the numbers right. 27 COVID cases reported by the NHL yesterday, league-wide. 17 with the Dallas Stars. Can you just give us an update and really kind of share what things are like there in Dallas right now?
Yeah, so when you introduced the show and said we're getting back to talking hockey, I kind of got a kick out of that because I hope to get back to that soon. The Stars should be flying to Florida today, or yesterday actually, but instead they're having practices. They returned to practice yesterday after being off for 4 days due to COVID, preceded by scheduled off days, so 5 days off. Yesterday was strange because they came back and there were 14 players absent. Now, that's 14 players not counting the 3 designated non-participants in Tyler Seguin, Ben Bishop, and Stephen Johns, and not including Thomas Harley, who was in a travel quarantine after World Juniors. So 14 players that practiced with the team last week were not present at practice yesterday. And that kind of made sense because the last we heard before that was 6 players tested positive. That was last Friday. And so it kind of checked out and you're like, okay, that's probably the 6 players and a lot of contact tracing. And then the NHL last night released a statement of 17 players. And that math just doesn't add up really, because it's you didn't have 14 players. Now 17 tested positive. Of course, the time span is the last 2 weeks, so we don't know at what point in those 2 weeks. But they're back at practice today. Thomas Harley is actually out of quarantine, and that's a big thing for the Stars. But from a league standpoint, they're out of practice today. A few guys that were out yesterday actually did return today, in Jason Robertson I think Jason Robertson and Joel Hanley. So those 2 guys who were also out for Wednesday's practice returned today. So I guess some progress is being made, but I know we were talking to Lisa before about, rosters being due. The Stars, they submitted their roster yesterday. They're cap compliant. They're ready to go, but they haven't released an official roster yet. And whatever they do release is going to be far from what it's going to be when puck drops.
So how is that? So, the Dallas Stars are one of the last 2 teams we saw standing and there's been a lot of celebration of the Tampa Bay Lightning and what they were able to accomplish in the bubble. Dallas was an equally great story. I think that indelible image of Jamie Benn sitting in the dressing room, with the weight of the world on his shoulders when he realized they were done was like, that still sticks with me. How are they handling this? This is a tough way to start to get back on track. It's hard enough when you're the runner-up. I always feel like everyone talks about the Stanley Cup hangover for the winner. Well, at least the winner has the cup. Like there's a Stanley Cup hangover for the loser, minus all the fun. Like how are they handling this as a team in terms of expectations?
Yeah, it was really weird because, they won. And then like 2 weeks later, it's like, hey, congratulations, you won. Now your top scorer is out until April. Your number 1 goalie is out until March. So that's kind of how they were greeted with their Stanley Cup run, and so it's been weird. And then you add in this whole COVID thing, and it just takes a lot of the air out of the balloon, right? But with the Stars, I will say this: I've been covering them for 2.5 years. This is just par for the course in terms of just adversity. I mean, whether it's their CEO saying things about their two superstars, they started 1-7-1 last year. Before the pandemic hit and before the stoppage, they were 0-6. And so they were 0-6 in the last 6 games. They come out of the bubble, and then they went on that run. So they're kind of, not to mention the coach getting fired. So they're used to a lot of this adversity hitting, but it's been strange because even after that Stanley Cup run, you didn't get the celebratory tone, because another thing is that, I don't know exactly how Tampa handled their staffing and all that, but right after the season was over, furloughs hit again. So a lot of the content creation from the team that would have celebrated a lot of the accomplishments, that wasn't able to happen because the guys and girls that would be doing that, they were furloughed. So there was no celebration.
It reminds me a little, I mean, it's completely different, but you're right. It seems like the Stars are always dealing with something. I remember the World Cup a couple of years ago, the one team that just got hammered by injuries before the start of the season was the Stars, and they had to deal with all of that constantly. But you're right, like this is a veteran group. They're used to that. They'll plow through. I'm going to stick with, we're not in the West. I don't even know what the divisions, whatever we're calling them. I'm going to stick in the western part of the United States and bring in Lisa Dillman to chat a little bit. Lisa, of course, covers the Kings for us, but I mean, you know this league, you know that division. Can you give us a sense of, in talking to people out there, you have the sense that things are kind of wide open a little bit, and I would want to get your feel for how things are going to shake out.
I would agree with that. It seems like it's a division of the haves and have-nots, really. And traditionally, when teams had to come through California, it was viewed as this difficult run, and now they're at the bottom, really. And
right.
Who knows with Arizona? But I think if you're looking from a Kings and Ducks standpoint, it actually having Minnesota in the division rather than Dallas was a major bonus, meaning that fourth spot is really up for grabs now. It's there to be taken. If you get off to a fast start, who knows? And conversely, if you get off to a slow start, it could really be devastating. And specifically to the Kings, they're dealing with a lot of issues, not as many as Dallas, but they had 5 players listed as unfit to play. Now 2 of them have come back, but among the 3 that are still out and not on the opening night roster, their backup goaltender, Cal Peterson, and 2 of their top 6 defensemen in Curtis McDermott and Sean Walker. So they're dealing with some adversity as well at this stage. And we're sort of navigating this whole fuzzy area of unfit to play. And we're speaking with Rob Blake later this afternoon. And hopefully he can, speak more clearly and a little more openly about the issues that they're facing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's going to be a thing all year for us, right, Lisa? Like we're trying to pin down some of these vague generalities of unfit to play, and especially as these games get more meaningful and get closer to the playoffs. I mean, not that the hockey world has ever been forthright with injuries, but how do you see that playing out, and how open do you see coaches being and articulating, or GMs in the case of Rob Blake, and articulating exactly what's happening?
Who knew we'd be longing for the days of lower body injury? Earth-shattering information.
I know, I miss the lower body injuries.
The only thing I've thought about during this last little stretch is I can't even imagine how Daryl Sutter would have been dealing with this.
Yeah, Daryl.
And then I'm thinking, okay, good. and it's tricky. It's hard for all of them. I mean, as Todd McClellan has pointed out, he's not a doctor. None of us are epidemiologists, and he's clearly uncomfortable in dealing with these questions right now because there's all these different gray areas of what you can say, what you can't say, and it's been pointed out correctly so that just because somebody's out doesn't mean they necessarily have tested positive. There's this whole wide range of protocols they're dealing with it. It could be, I know what we're like. If I wake up with a headache or runny nose, I'm certainly, sequestering myself from other people and kind of shutting it down. So I think a lot of that is going on here. I think there was a player that wasn't feeling well last week. Maybe had a headache. I'm not quite sure. And he wasn't there for 2 days. He's back there. He's perfectly fine. And that could be really the case of what's going on right now. I'm seeing, before we went on the call, I'm seeing some Twitter things coming out of Winnipeg where they're being more forthright about what's going on. So I think today is sort of a line of demarcation of murkiness to maybe slightly less murkiness.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. And sticking in your division, Lisa, Colorado Avalanche have kind of seemed to be the overwhelming favorite. People that seems to be the team everyone loves. And it's funny to think we're not that. Going back to something you said originally, we're not that far removed from California. You used to hear about the gauntlet through California, which is it's the opposite, right? Like that's where you're going to go. The gauntlet is now is going to be in Colorado. Like that is a powerhouse, like juggernaut potentially, right? We're talking about potential. When you see that team and where they are in their arc and how it kind of compares to some of these other great young teams, are you buying this? They're on the verge of being that good.
I am. They kind of remind me of a few years back, and we every year, and I think Pierre LeBrun would cop to this, but they'd say this is going to be the San Jose Sharks year, and we kind of make this will be their year. Yeah. And he wasn't the only one. I did it too. And
I did it. Guilty.
Yeah, I'm guilty. Exactly. Same holds the truth with Colorado. This year really seems to be their year. There's so much I like about them, and I don't really see any discernible weaknesses there. You just wonder. I mean, even the Edmonton Oilers in their glory days, they didn't go straight up. The trajectory wasn't like, even though everybody probably thinks it was. They had to sort of go up, up, down, and then resurface again. So teams do face those periods of adversity and the learning curve and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I'm giving away my athletic prediction. I have predicted that they will win the cup, which I'm sure is a path.
Yeah, and it's funny because all you have to do is look at the Tampa Bay Lightning to prove your point, Lisa. That was a team that had heartbreak. I remember sitting in Chicago in that dressing room when they lost the Blackhawks, and you could literally hear Gary Bettman awarding the Stanley Cup. And I've told the story, but it was so the heaviness in that dressing room. You could feel it, and I think I really believe you have to go through that as a franchise. And Colorado's. They've had some kind of flameouts in the playoffs. I don't know if they've had heartbreak to that extent, but I do think, and I'm going to bring in Tarek here to talk a little bit about this because the team he covers, the Washington Capitals, when you talk about having to go through that, the two heaviest dressing rooms I think I ever walked into was that Lightning one and the Washington Capitals dressing room after the Penguins beat them. I don't even know what year that was. Which time? The one before the Capitals won it all. So that time where I'm just think of Alex Ovechkin saying that, like TJ Oshie trying to answer questions saying, I don't have any more answers. Yeah. Like Tark, as somebody you've watched that arc, do you believe that these young teams that are we look at right now, Toronto's and Colorado's, they look great, but how much of that growth do you think you really have to go through as an organization, as a franchise to climb the mountain?
I think it's 100% true. I've known you for 2 decades now. We've been watching this league. I mean, we're getting old.
That can't be right.
I mean, look at even Sidney Crosby. I mean, you got to go through that heartbreak of seeing what it takes, coming up short, and then kind of doubling down the following year, and eventually breaking through. I think of some of the Caps. Postseason failures against the Penguins before they finally broke through in 2018. And I do feel like each time, maybe with the exception of the first one, which was early on in the Ovechkin era, each time from management on down, they realized what they had to do to get closer to getting past the Penguins the next time. Because let's be honest, here in DC, it's always about the Penguins. Since Ovechkin and Crosby broke into the league, you got 82 games to play, but at some point, whether it's in the most likely in the second round, you're going to have to beat Pittsburgh to get to where you want to be. You remember that old story about. Before Wayne Gretzky and the Oilers went on that run, he had to see, what the Islanders went through to win, all the pain, the story about him seeing, a glimpse through the locker room and, these guys should be celebrating and they're licking their wounds from what it took to get to the mountaintop. And, it's funny that the Capitals kind of are in the other situation now, 2 years removed from winning the championship. And there's some other teams in the division that are kind of, eyeing them, sizing them up as we got to get past those guys to get to where we want to be.
So where are the Capitals right now, Tark? Like, what? It's funny because we just got done. Dom and I got done doing our player tiers, and we had Alex Ovechkin, I think if I remember correctly, in the third tier, which fans didn't love.
I hear about it, man. You guys make it hard on a beat writer.
Sorry. So,
I don't disagree with what you said, though. I mean,
well,
right.
All right. Well, it's no disrespect to Alex. Like this is it's a projection, but it's also like, at some point he's going to slow down, and he's in our projections, and also not for nothing throwing it by people in the league. And they said, it's still these McKinnons now and McDavid's and like that. Austin Matthews. These are the class of the league now. What should we expect from Alex this year? And did you? I'm curious. Do you agree with our tier 3? I'm not putting you on the spot.
I do, and you nailed it. I mean, this is a league that's getting faster every year. Mm-hmm. Alex Ovechkin is 35 years old now. He scores a lot of his goals standing in one spot on the circle, right? I mean, in the OV office, right? It seems like the game is moving in a different direction. I still think he is going to find a way to put the puck in the net because of his shot, because of his release, because of he in the past couple of off seasons has really worked on his body, worked on his conditioning. As guys get older, they have to trim down a little bit because you can't carry quite as much. But look, this is a game that's getting faster, and Ovi doesn't skate the way he did in 2007-8. I still think that he's going to produce. And in talking about your analytics with Dom, the Capitals, they read every single word you guys write too. They have their own analytics department, like most teams. They're very aware of what you guys write, and occasionally I'll run into a front office staffer who chime in, and they don't disagree with what you guys say for the most part. Where they diverge is they feel like their internal analytics have their older players dropping off further down the road than you guys do. So I
thought you were going to say further down. I thought they were like tier 3 was too kind. You mean further down the road?
just in terms of age. So for example, if you guys have, if Dom has, and I actually have the graphic somewhere, dropping off next year, they got that a year later.
Okay.
If you guys have John Carlson dipping next year or the year after that, they have it a year or two down the road. I don't know if that's rose-colored glasses, or if that's just a diverging opinion. But I will tell you this: I mean, the analytics departments in the NHL. I mean, it's incumbent upon those people to not fall in love with their players, because they're trying to give the manager real information, like, hey, it's time to get rid of this guy, or hey, why don't we try to go get that guy, or hey, we need to look at these combinations, right? So you want that information to be as accurate as possible without it being tinged with your personal feelings for the guys that are in your dressing room.
I gotta say, like, my experience, teams do. I mean, they're attached to their players, right down to like their prospects and their they. I don't want to say overvalue, because whatever, but like I think ideally what our job is to maybe pan out and say, here's where we're looking from a league-wide perspective. And so all right, so in terms of sticking in the East, I would be curious to see what you guys think. And Tarek, you can answer just because you're sitting there. That I want to get the name right, so I'm pulling up the divisions. The Mass Mutual East is this fascinating division with some powerhouses up and down. Like it's a fascinating division. You got Peter Laviolette taking over in Wash. Maybe this is arguably their last really legit shot there. How do you see that division shaking out?
It's tough. I mean, bringing in Boston, I think, really changed things up a lot. I for a while thought the Devils were going to be a surprise team, but losing Crawford, I don't know where that's going to go. I think Blackwood's a good player, but I'm just not sure where they're going to go, and whether their young players are going to be are going to take as big a step forward as maybe some people expect. I'm not sure Buffalo is going to be going anywhere. My overarching feeling is, Craig, that this is a really stacked division. In my opinion, the toughest division in the league. 4 teams are going to make the playoffs. A couple of good teams are not going to make the playoffs. I've got the Capitals getting in. I think their streak of winning 5 consecutive divisions, those are Metro divisions, not Mass Mutual East divisions, obviously, but I think that's going to come to an end. I think it'd be too much to ask, especially with their young goaltending situation, to run away from everyone. But I think they do get in. But I mean, I could easily see a surprise team like the Penguins not make it, or the Flyers go to a rough start and it's, tough sledding for them. I mean, someone good, we're going to be like, how did they not make it? And that's the reality of being in the toughest division in hockey.
All right. Well, I've got you guys all pulled up on the screen. I'm gonna answer a question from Twitter. This is from @resec15. I'm trying guessing there. With everyone thinking Montreal is going to the top of the Canadian division, what was the last team to make that big of a leap when adding so many free agents to completely change the dynamic of the team? And so, they make the trade for Josh Anderson. They had Tyler Toffoli. Like, I don't know. Like, when you think about the Canadians, I still think it's a team that's been refreshed with some youth. It's still Carey Price's team. So I don't know if I agree completely with the premise of them being completely overrun with free agents. But they did make some prominent moves in this offseason. A much better team. They seem to have some popularity. I'd be curious if you guys can think of examples, because I do agree with the premise that winning the offseason, maybe Sad, you could start, because winning the offseason doesn't automatically mean you're going to win. Like Dallas, this seemed like there's stretch there where you'd say, oh, wow, I love what Jim Nill did. And then they get off to this rough start. There's an acclimation period, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also a reason why, Dallas has stayed status quo after making that Stanley Cup run, because the continuity and all that stuff, it's not just about those big splashes. I think they were in their big splash phase, if you will, a couple of years ago, when at the deadline they added Matt Zuccarello, and that didn't work out, so they let him go, got Joe Pavelski, got Corey Perry, and now I think they're at a spot where they're like, all right, we're done making these big additions, and it's time to just double down on this window that we have here and just go all in. And so I think, you're absolutely right. It takes time, and it's not just about winning the offseason, because they've done that in the past. But now it's to a point where, we saw this for a few years. It even goes back to acquiring Ben Bishop, right? So they made all these moves, these big flashy moves. Now it's at a point where this is now going to be the team, and this is the window for the next 2 years. Miro Heiskanen's ascending. Rick Bowness is back for a couple more years. Now it's the time for them to really hit, because they've done all those big moves already.
I agree. Like, I think I'm always partial to the teams that have the homegrown and they've tweaked and they've gone, and maybe they added somebody a couple of years ago, but now you just, and you guys have covered the league a long time. You get to a point where you just have a feel about a team, and you're like, okay, like, this is their time. Like, they've now meshed. They've had some, they've gone up and down a little bit. Like, Lisa, is there any team either that you feel like you think the free agency ads need some acclimation period, or you just feel like it's their time?
Well, I was going to actually answer what the person asked on Twitter before I get to that, but I wish we had JR on this call, because you look at the Blues, and it wasn't a free agent signing. It was Ryan O'Reilly. That's a great one. Trade. It was a trade, and they had the components you talked about, the homegrown talent, and just needed to make that one last move, and what a move it was. So, sometimes it just needs that. You don't need to do a whole bunch of things. It's just something as simple as that. And I'm dating myself a little bit. If you go way back when the Ducks won the Cup, the last couple pieces they added were, Hall of Famer Scott Niedermayer, and then the Pronger trade. So they also had a lot of homegrown talent, Ryan Getzlaf, et cetera. But sometimes it just takes those last couple moves, and it's a difficult thing. Like you talked about, you made a really good point earlier about people being in love with their prospects. Sure, you can love your prospects, but sometimes you have to be bold, and you have to make that hard move. The fans are in love with these prospects, but you have to make that move that's going to disappoint people, and it doesn't always pay off. But sometimes you have to be bold.
Yeah, we saw that with the Caps. You're right. Like, I think of some of the big moves they made, or trading for Oshie, or adding Shattenkirk at the deadline. Yeah. It takes time for that to work out.
It does, and I would say this is the year where you don't want to have a new group. You don't want to have 6 important players, because you've got 10 days of training camp, and then you're right into the season. I mean, typically the Capitals have 3 groups of players in training camp. They went right from day one into basically who they announced today as their lineup, their opening night lineup. There was no time to mess around. And I think teams that are trying to introduce a bunch of new players, guys who are going to play 20-plus minutes, it's going to be tough on them. There are no preseason games. You go right into what matters. It's a shortened season, 56 games. You get off to a 2-7-1 start, you're buried. I mean, that might be curtains. And by the time you find out, what makes this team click, it might be too late.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Tark. I think if you're looking to pick division winners or successful regular season teams, I think that's where you look. Where has there been some continuity? Where are the people healthy? Where are they motivated? Right? Like I look at the bubble and the teams that got knocked out early. I was like, I'm not even sure they wanted to be there.
Yeah,
right? I can sit there and name. You're like, they had no interest in playing in this. Whereas Tampa was like, coming off of last year's heartbreak or 2 years ago, whatever it was, that they were motivated. And I think that's what it's like. This is going to be a really hard year. So I don't think you want to be introducing a bunch of new players. And I think you want to be at a point in your development as an organization where you are motivated for whatever reason to succeed. I like these questions. I'll keep them going. This was it popped up on our screen for a second from Toon Squad 42. When do the Penguins fall off? Let's start there. I say not yet. Where are you guys at on the Penguins?
We're close.
I think we're close. Rossi?
Yeah, can we phone a friend on this one? I got a few people I can loop in.
Guys, I think the Penguins are very much on the same schedule as the Capitals. Mm-hmm. I think they both have another year or two with the current group before the wheels are gonna fall off, and they're gonna have to make some hard assessments. And they're gonna say, are we gonna continue to try to retool this on the fly, or are we gonna break it down and not necessarily start all over? They're going to keep Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin as the centerpieces, but really start a ground up rebuild, with those guys as the kind of founding fathers of that team.
Founding fathers. Don't tell Jim Rutherford about rebuilds. He doesn't want to hear it. He is going to keep that Stanley Cup window going as long as possible. But you've seen that, Lisa, like when these teams extended, right? What's that?
I wish there were more general managers like him. I mean, seriously, I'm irrationally jealous of our guys in Pittsburgh that get to talk to him regularly, and he doesn't just speak; he actually says stuff.
Guys, when we did our fantasy draft, I picked Jim Rutherford simply because the guy makes a trade every 5 minutes.
Yeah,
and you never sit down and go, "Oh, what are we going to write? What am I going to write about today? I got to write a story." I mean, you wait long enough in the day, he's traded somebody.
Yeah.
And he's texting you to tell you what he did.
Yeah, it sounds great. Like he's giving you the heads up that, like, if you call him, he's like, looking to add a right wing, maybe a guy whose last name, rhymes with, and you're like, you could look really smart. That's not to take away from Josh Yohe and the fine work he does, but he does have he kept the bat line to the GM, which is great. All right, let's keep rolling with the questions from Twitter. I love this. This comes from Devin Spence. Thoughts on the Leafs? We haven't even talked about the center of the hockey universe. So that goes back to my thought on Montreal. And when I look at teams, who's motivated, who has some continuity. I know they made they reworked the back end a little bit, but I think that young group. I'm on the Leafs train this year, pretty hardcore. If we're picking cup winners, I'm looking really hard in that direction because I think you're gonna, there's some question now if that core of young players can win together, and do you at some point have to break them up because they're all so expensive? Like I see maybe there's some urgency there. There's a lot to prove, and they're so talented. I'm a fan. I think this is going to be a really good year for the Leafs.
I can't believe we've gone almost 30 minutes without talking about them. That is extraordinary. And to throw Joe Thornton into the mix is just fascinating to me. I mean, that's appointment TV tonight, watching them. I can't wait to see how he looks at the kids. And then, you all know this, but I mean, he's gotten in some meaningful playing time in the Swiss League. And I wish I'd somehow been able to engineer a trip over there to write about him, but that's neither here nor there. I can't go anywhere. But I'm absolutely fascinated to see how that all pulls together. And I think you're right. There is urgency coming, but I think the group is so young and so talented that like, let's see what these guys can do.
I got a couple thoughts on that. Number one, Craig, I agree with you. I feel like the way we looked at maybe the Penguins after that first disappointment is, okay, their time has come. Maybe with the Capitals, it was a little bit later in their kind of trajectory, but they were due, right? They were due to win a championship. And I do feel like the Leafs have that feel going into this year. Mm-hmm. They have a good mix of veterans and young stars. And, I just read a story by James Myrtle about how Austin Matthews, employed all this new training into his regimen, is going to be, as everyone always says, the best shape of his life. But you know what? I think if anyone's going to beat out Alex Ovechkin for the Rocket Richard, it's going to be Matthews with that shot he's got. They just have so much young talent, and like I said, they've got some good veterans, in the room now, especially with Jumbo showing up. The question for me with them is always defense and goaltending. Yep. Can that be consistent enough? And we shall see. But man, Canada's going to lose their stuff if the Leafs are able to pull this off.
I like Freddie Anderson. I don't get I don't understand the hand wringing over Freddie Anderson. I think he's
good enough.
He's good enough to win a championship. I think they tend to ride him pretty hard, and maybe you think about workload. I think this year, I mentioned it in the goalie tiers package I did, but in talking to people, they're like, you better have a locked in horse that you can ride, because these coaches, with every game, so much on the line, with these goalies, they're not going to want to go to the backup unless they really have a 1B kind of backup. So
do you think Jack Campbell is that guy? I covered him in LA, and it'll be really interesting to see how he handles the pressure of playing in Toronto for 56 games, because he came in late last season and seemed to fare quite well, actually. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how he responds to the hotbed of hockey there. And, started his career in Dallas, and it's a fascinating arc, how he is the ECHL, came to the Kings, rehabilitated his game, and now he's in Toronto. Like I said, I'm very, very curious to see how it goes. He's a perfect team guy too. The guy's already in Toronto. He's amazing. I guess he's quite a heck of a cook too.
What do you think, Lisa? What is your instinct, knowing Jack as well as you do and having covered him through the years? How do you think, if he has to start very important games under that white hot spotlight?
There's nobody that works harder than Jack Campbell. He comes off the practice, he comes out from practice. He's just drenched. He works so hard. In fact, they had to tell him to quit working too hard. But it is such a leap to go from the understudy to Jonathan Quick or to Freddie Anderson. Well, the understudy to Jonathan Quick in a market where hockey is far down the pecking order as opposed to Toronto. I wonder. I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that question, because the markets are just so different, and his role. His role, I don't know if it could be increased or not, if what would happen if it was increased.
Yeah. So you saw a backup goalie get hot. I mean, it can happen, right? Like we've seen it. Like, what's it like when the backup seizes control of a situation?
Yeah, and I think a guy like Jack Campbell. I think you have to have. I don't know if you have to, but I'm just speaking from my experience. The backup goalie when he's someone that the whole team just really resonates with, and someone that, more than just beyond his game, is someone that the locker room is just behind, which is exactly what Anton Khudobin was. I mean, whether Ben Bishop is a Vezina caliber goalie, but throughout the last 2 years, Anton Khudobin has won over the entire locker room no matter what, just with his lovability, his just the way that he is, his personality. And so I think that plays a big role in how successful that person is going to be, because when Bishop there was a lot of ambiguity about why Bishop wasn't going in the Edmonton bubble, but the Stars really didn't blink. I mean, the guys really rallied behind Anton Khudobin, not to take anything from Anton, because he obviously was doing great in his own right, but in reality, that defense in front of him was phenomenal. The forwards were great in helping out as well. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And Anton, the other thing with that is Anton had given you hints over the last 2 years going into the bubble that he was ready for this. He had just done it in spurts. To give him the full load, that's where the difference kind of came. But, in general, just seeing the way that the guys have been with Anton Khudobin, I just think that is really important, where you don't have a situation. I wish we had Jesse here, but like in Vegas, right? Like,
Yeah.
That different situation when there is some goalie drama and things like that. There was never any of that in Dallas for the last 2 years. There was never any drama.
I think if I'm a GM, I factor that into my backup goalie. Like, do the guys want to play? Like, we've all seen it where the team loves the backup. So when he does get that spot start, the team plays flawless in front of him. And you don't want the backup that guys aren't fans of, right? Like that in terms of that dynamic. That's a great point, Sad. All right, I want to keep moving with these questions because they're rolling in, and I already feel jammed for time. This one is from HI definition 14. Okay, so as a Devils fan, should I worry about their second rebuild since their last cup run? I'm going to start because I'm fresh off talking to people about the Devils is part of the goalie package. Losing Corey Crawford, I think, is a huge loss for them. And I hate to be like the bearer of bad news here. And not because Mackenzie Blackwood isn't a good goalie. I think he is. I think he's ready to be a number one goalie. But I think Corey Crawford was just about the perfect complement to Mackenzie Blackwood. Was going to come in and, here's how a borderline Hall of Fame goalie plays. He's still a good goalie, still put up great numbers, can spot start, takes all the pressure off of a young goalie. And Mackenzie Blackwood's still really young. And now it's all on this kid's shoulders again. In goaltending, if you look at the Devils and where things have stalled the last couple of years, that's where you can point. So I don't know, how worried are we about the Devils in their second rebuild, you guys?
A little concerned. I mean, I got to see more from Jack Hughes. Actually, in our writers poll the other day, I put him down as, and I kind of stuck my neck out for him as most improved. Mm-hmm. I do think he's going to have a big jump from what I've read and gathered from talking to people. But I mean, I think that losing Crawford is, like you said, is going to be a pretty tough blow for them. I think that also Hughes, like, they need some help offensively. They need some guys to really step up and kind of reach their potential along with Hughes. For a long time, we've talked about the Devils as this young team with a lot of talent coming. Now they got to start putting it together. They got to start putting it together, and they got to start putting it together on a consistent basis. So they gave the Capitals fits. They got a lot of speed. They got a lot of hardworking players, but they've really made it hard on the Capitals the past couple of years, especially in Newark. But if I'm a Devils fan, I'm a little concerned right now.
Yeah, I am too. Let's keep it flying here. D Bacon asks, Bobrovsky rebound this year. So let's do we'll go around the loop here. Bob, is he back this year, or are we worried?
I'm never giving a goaltender $10 million ever again. I can tell you that. I mean, maybe with the exception of Carey Price, but I think what we have figured out here is goaltenders are like closers in baseball, right? Yeah. Like, some years they have it, some years they don't. They might get it back, they might not. You know, it's important to have a good one, maybe two good ones. But man, you start betting on a guy and you start backing up the Brinks truck, and he has a season like he did last year, you're in big trouble.
I agree. All right, so you're saying thumbs down?
Maybe. I mean, maybe. Like I said, I mean, maybe this is the year he gets it back. I just feel like there's so much between the ears with goaltenders. It's just they're really hard to predict. I covered Braden Holtby the last 3 years. Didn't even start the playoff run. He leads them to a Stanley Cup. It's a very mercurial position to try to nail down.
All right, I'm going to
pile on that. I still remember Braden Holtby standing in the dressing room in Anaheim and where the Caps came through and had a horrible California run, and thinking, what's going on with this guy? You're absolutely right. Look, like, you just cannot judge from those little quick snapshots. And to be contrarian, he rebounds. That's okay.
All right, you're right. Saad, thumbs up or thumbs down on Bob's year this year?
You can break the tie.
I'm gonna. He's in the division this year too for the Stars. So.
So weird.
So weird, right?
I'm gonna say he rebounds. I think he does. So yeah.
Okay. I think. Tark's right. it's hard not to view Sergei Bobrovsky through the lens of his contract. It really is. Like, and the other thing is, I always get nervous when goalies go from a system like John Tortorella has I would say a goalie friendly system in Columbus to Joe Quenneville. It's a little more up tempo, not as defensively sound with the players in Florida. So I worry about the fit. That's it. I don't know. I'm not saying Sergei Bobrovsky's done being a good goalie. I just worry about the fit in Florida. Who are we higher on, Calgary or Vancouver as a group? And this comes from Devin Spence.
Devin Spence. Wow. It's weird. It feels like those teams have just decided to okay, let's just deal like they've traded places. It's uncanny. Like Travis Hamonic's in Calgary and now, okay, he's in Vancouver. It's just Tanev and Tanev's Mark, Calgary finally has that stud goalie. It's so desperately needed in Markstrom. I mean, it's like the first kind of reassurance since the Kiprusoff days almost.
Yeah.
Did they take a step back this year? I think a half step back. And then Tariq can probably answer the second part of that better than I can.
Well, I like Vancouver. I guess there's a little bit of sentimentality there. It's like Capitals West right now. You want to see the guys you covered who've moved on do well. Yeah. Jay Beagle's there. He was a longtime Caps favorite here, and Braden Holtby's there, and Nate Schmidt.
What did they get in Nate Schmidt? Holy cow! What a personality! What a personality!
Okay. I covered Travis Green when he was a New York Islander back in the late '90s. So you know what? The thing I'm most excited about, it seems like I'm going to be able to see them play a little more often because I feel like they're always playing at 10:30 at night, and I want to watch their young stars. And they're an exciting team, and I'm falling asleep at that time. I'm old. Yeah. So, now that they're going to be playing so many games against Eastern Canadian teams, I'm looking forward to seeing them a little more.
You like Holtby?
I'm sorry.
Go
ahead.
I like Holtby if he is able to recapture, I think it's going to be tough for him to be the player he was from 2014 to 2017 under Barry Trotz. But if he can just get back to where he was in, the start of the 2018 season, I think he can be pretty good. I think that he took a lot of bullets last year. He took a lot of blame for a team that was not playing very well defensively in front of him. I mean, some of those great agents. Now, he wasn't great. He probably wasn't even very good. But, it also hurts when every time you look up, you're facing a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-2, and, guys are shooting from the middle of the circle. I mean, some of the chances that he faced were just, it was absurd on some nights. I think in a more structured environment, I do think he could be better.
All right, last question comes from Court Lee _75. Do you think playing against less familiar teams this year has a big impact on how teams fare? I'm going to say no. I just feel like the league, I don't feel like there's a huge difference from team to team in terms of how teams play. I don't know if it's going to have a huge impact, your opponent versus, in the familiarity, but that's just my guess. What do you guys think on that one?
And let's face it, they're all familiar with each other. Somebody was talking, I forgot what call it was. They're all running together. They're asking about the Kings about the book on Minnesota. And I said, we have the book on Minnesota. Not a lot has changed. They know this stuff inside out. And in terms of the Kings division, it's a lot of it's quite familiar actually. So I don't think it'll be a major impact at all.
Yeah, I think the frequency. I mean, they're going to build up to that anyways, right? They're going to become very familiar with each other. Yeah. And just in the Stars case, in one, Tampa Bay is supposed to be this, the new team in the division. I mean, the Stars have probably seen Tampa Bay. They're probably tired of seeing Tampa Bay by now.
Good point.
But yeah, so I think I don't think it'll have a huge impact. If anything, a little earlier in the season. But once the season goes along, it's a bunch of little playoff series they're playing against each other, so they'll be familiar.
My hot take on this, guys, after years of watching fighting majors decline, I think we might see a small uptick.
All right.
Guys are gonna be so sick of each other. I mean, by like week 3, the Caps will play Buffalo like 4 times. I mean, they're just gonna be tired of one another. I think this is gonna be a fun season for the fans that love analytics and love watching and tracking the game within the game. You're gonna see teams on the second time going through. They're going to try a different goalie. They're going to mix and match their defensive pairs. There's going to be more line matching. It's more like, as Saad said, more like a playoff series. Instead of just pulling into Boston on a Tuesday night, you might have just played them on Saturday night. So you got to feel for who's dinged up and who doesn't look right, and who's not playing well. And I think you're going to see a lot of that inside baseball, a lot of that, that game within the game. It's going to be really fun to track.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for doing this. It was great to see you, even just on screen here for a second, all of you. Hopefully we'll see you in a press box at some point. And thanks to everyone who asked questions and interacted and watched on Twitter. Thank you for watching. Last thing, I just want to, if you aren't familiar with the Athletics Hockey Show, the new podcast hosted by Ian Mendez and Scott Burnside and Pierre Lebrun, hosts a day during the week. It's awesome. So definitely go to Apple Podcasts, check out the Athletic Hockey Show. Broke some news. Bill Daly had COVID, and the podcast has existed for a week. We're already breaking news on there. So it's so good. So definitely check that out and have a great season, everyone.
Hey everyone, it's Ian Mendes, host of the Athletic Hockey Show. Join me, Pierre Lebrun, Sean McIndoe, Scott Burnside, Haley Salvian, and other great NHL writers from the Athletic Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays starting January the 11th. We'll look at the best matchups of the week, talk to insiders from around the league, talk analytics, prospects, and more. Find the Athletic Hockey Show wherever you get your podcasts.